Welcome to the Solid Verbal. And now, Dan and Ty.
Welcome, everybody, to the Solid Verbal. My name is Dan. I'm doing this intro because Ty has happily accepted a new position handling crisis PR for the University of North Carolina, and we're all rooting for Ty. With his background in communications, everything is going to go so smoothly for Coach Belichick, for Ty, and I can't wait to see how this all turns out. So we're going with the next best guest co-host today for the Solid Verbal, and that would be from ESPN, Bill Connelly. Bill, how's life?
It's not too bad. It's my job's a lot easier than that one, so I'm feeling pretty good.
I can't imagine. I did see the story that Bill Belichick has reached out because his old PR point person, I think, is now Bill O'Brien's chief of staff. I don't know if you saw any of this.
I didn't see that part. I saw that he was reaching. Oof.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll see how that turns out. I don't think Bill Connelly has any specific insights into the behind-the-scenes goings-on at North Carolina, but if you want to break any news,
everything I've learned about that whole situation was against my will. I had no interest in learning anything that I've learned about any of that over the last 5 months. So I'm looking forward to when the games start and we can actually talk about that. But in the meantime, no, I'll just pass on this whole thing.
Like his name brethren, Bill Connelly is wearing a college sweatshirt on this. If you're watching on YouTube, there are no rips like Bill Belichick had on his CBS interview. This is a Swosu. Are they the Bulldogs?
A good Bulldog, too. Pretty good Bulldog.
It's a good Bulldog. That's right. The ghost eyes, which I don't always love, but it works on a Bulldog. So thank you for wearing a non-rip sweatshirt. So you wrote on ESPN.com a piece late last week about 2024's luckiest and unluckiest teams, which is those are two loaded words in the college football universe, as you know. And you pointed out and you showed your work what lucky means, what unlucky means, and what that could mean for 2025, even with all of the movement that always happens within the sport. And you came to a number of conclusions, might be too rigid a word, but you came to some interesting places with what you found. So if you could describe for people who don't know what lucky actually means and what unlucky actually means per your numbers.
Yeah, the whole social media falling apart thing, I think, was good for me in this instance, because usually calling a team lucky is the best way to get yourself yelled at. No, this was fun. I've talked about turnovers luck a lot through the years. I've talked about, I haven't really ever quantified injuries luck, but we always talk about it. And then, the whole one score, your record in one score games, second order wins, post game win expectancy, that kind of stuff. End up talking a lot about that too. And so basically just decided to dump this all into one giant post with 3 giant tables in early May, and kind of liked how it turned out. We're talking about 3 different things here. We start off talking about turnovers luck, which is, you can basically look at, the old Phil Steele turnovers equal turnaround thing from way back when. I think that's what planted this whole idea in my head. Right. But we can take it a little bit beyond simply looking at who had the best or worst turnover margin, because, the number of fumbles you commit in a given season or force or whatever can change. Maybe you have a little control over that, but we know that at the end of the season, you're supposed to have recovered about 50% of all fumbles. And the other part that I dive into is that the ratio of interceptions to pass breakups. Typically, that's about 1 to 4. About 20-ish% of your overall passes defended will be interceptions. So we can kind of take that. We can start there and then basically look at what everybody actually did in the turnovers department. And we can see that, there are always going to be some teams with pretty big differences. JMU led the nation in that difference. They should have, their turnover margin should have been about +8, but it was +20. That's probably bad for JMU in 2025. Indiana was really high on this list too. They were +15 overall. They probably should have been about +5. Clemson was in the same range. So that we can confidently say that they probably benefited more from bounces than they should have. And then at the other end, poor Southern Miss, they were going to be bad no matter what, but their turnover margin should have been about -8, and it was -19 instead. So they brought up the rear in that category. Although if everything flips this year, then they have a new coach, good new coach actually. That was one of my favorite hires of the offseason. He can get a couple bounces. They can start off strong.
Hey, real quick, it'd be great if you could consider subscribing to the YouTube channel down below. It really helps us out. Can you extrapolate that to even a further step almost, and saying like, yes, fumbles are a 50-50 coin flip, but this team happened to play a lot of fumble-prone teams.
Right.
Or, the interception and passes defended, it's 1-4, 1-5, but they actually went on a run of a lot of sloppy quarterbacks who were throwing a lot of interceptable balls. Or is that too far down the rabbit hole?
The fumbles part will just average. Since, it really is like offenses are going to recover 50, 51%. Like
Right.
we can pretty much say like, if there are more fumbles than, then I guess we can sort of say that, well, no, because I guess that'll come out in the expected turnover margin. Now that I think about it, because if you played a lot of teams that fumbled more and they fumbled more against you, then it still would you would have recovered half of them no matter
it's
what.
the same oblong ball
Yeah,
that does the
that's
weird
right.
bounces.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I just try to take it a little bit beyond simply looking at turnover margin. Although if you look at the turnover margins, it's gonna be approximately the same list regardless.
So who did, and I don't know if it's unluckiest, because unlucky means the numbers were just not favoring that team, right? That they lost way too many fumbles or way too many tip passes came down in the hands of a safety's arms. I don't know what the term would be, that if you're not lucky nor are you unlucky, you're just expected. Like that's almost the most depressing thing if a team is bad and they were neither unfortunate or fortunate. That,
Right.
Like I think I saw Wisconsin was sort of squarely in the middle there, where they didn't benefit and they didn't suffer. What do you learn from teams like that? It just they are who they are?
Well, the other part of that is like Ball State was the fourth most lucky team in the turnovers department, and they were bad.
Right, exactly.
USC was fifth most lucky, and they were not very good. So that's certainly, that in and of itself, it's kind of a scary thought. But yeah, it is kind of, you can look in the middle, like Alabama was right in the middle. They had one of the single most unlucky turnovers of the season in that amazingly perfect tipped pass that Vanderbilt ended up picking off and returning for a touchdown. They actually had bad turnovers luck in that specific game, but other games they were fine. So they were right in the middle. We'll talk about Alabama shortly if we're going down these lists, but turnovers wise, they were pretty much right in the right where they were supposed to be. I'm looking at the list, the most exactly, like the teams that had exactly the turnover margin they were supposed to were basically Troy, bad, Wisconsin, pretty bad, West Virginia, not good enough apparently, Oregon State, Western Michigan, Missouri and Alabama were still pretty good. Nevada was still pretty. I actually thought Nevada was like quite good at the beginning of the season, and then they just had no depth whatsoever. But anyway, those teams did not really play a role in the turnovers department. Close games department, however, Alabama was one of the least lucky teams in the country, and that's just such a bummer to say. I like it when it's some random team that you can say was unlucky and is going to go on a run, but the two most likely, I keep coming around to Alabama and Ole Miss being two of the least lucky teams last year, and that's not a lot of fun.
Right. It's also interesting because, and I don't know how it's fully quantified in other sports, but there's, like, for instance, in basketball, there is a clutch stat. Like when your team is within this many, you're ahead by 5 or fewer, or you're down by 5 or fewer with 3 or fewer minutes left or whatever. I almost wonder if there's a way to have a clutch stat that would sort of take the luck out of the equation, or maybe sort of push the luck to the side a little bit, that like it could almost follow a coach, that if you were putting together like 3rd and 4th and shorts, putting together end of half drives within a certain number of points, end of game drives within 4 minutes. And, one of the things we like to joke about on the show was, James Franklin in a close loss, it seemed like they didn't have a 4-minute offense. We said every team needs something that they like, okay, we're calling out Excelsior, right? Excelsior is our 4-minute offense. Is there any way to group together like high leverage moments into a statistic that are like, this team is just, the Boy Scouts of college football, always prepared?
Yeah, Bud Elliott and I have talked about that a lot through the years. He kind of has a running theory that there could be some sort of close game formula based simply on quarterback, special teams, and pure clock management coach stuff like 4-minute drill or whatever. And, your special teams personnel and your quarterback change quite a bit. But, if we look at, there's also a pure talent standpoint. Is the team that's more talented is probably going to win more close games too.
Totally.
And so I just pulled up the last 10 years, the teams with the best overall record in one score games are Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State. Those are the top three. Alabama's up there too. Now, Michigan State being up there is kind of interesting that we can relive some of D'Antonio's best teams there. Oklahoma State's up there. They always manage to win a couple games where they just make it as dumb and chaotic as possible, and then they're the ones that figure out their way out of the mess better. But yeah, like that, there is certainly a talent aspect to all of this over a long enough period of time, at least. So that makes it maybe even more notable that among the bottom 10 or 15 or so in the way I looked at close games was comparing your record to basically what your record should have been based on those post-game win expectancy figures that I always post in the each Sunday during the season.
Right.
Where, it basically says with the stats this game produced, you could have expected to win this game like 90% of the time. That becomes, 0.9 on average. Alabama was their second order win total was 10.7. which basically means they statistically won just about every game they played. They only won 9 of those games, however, and that was almost a 2-game difference. That was damn near close to the bottom in terms of, just the overall college football. Now, Auburn is...
There's always this team, yeah.
Right, so if you, I can't justifiably say, believe in Auburn. Because when you see a team make exactly the single play they shouldn't make in every single game they play, like you start to believe in coaching playing a role here and everything else. And so they have that to overcome. But the bottom line is statistically, they produce better success rates than their opponents in just about every game. They produce more big plays than their opponents in just about every game. It takes a perfect confluence of turnovers and horrific red zone execution and a lot of things that you can fix from one season to another. And might have been bad luck to begin with in the season. That Auburn was by far the least fortunate team from a second order wins perspective, and they really should have been they should have had a lot better record than they did. So if it wasn't just all coaching, then here we go. They're gonna turn around. They're gonna have an amazing receiving core this year if they have a quarterback to throw them the ball anyway. Or if Jackson Arnold isn't just permanently broken. But yeah, I mean, they are a major turnaround candidate. And every time I say that, I remember all those errors they made last year. And it's hard for me to get all the way behind that.
Right. When a team is just good enough to be in a game and makes decisions just bad enough to take them out of the game in those huge moments. So yeah, maybe this is the suplex stat, right? This is the back-breaking stat that you're going to figure out. And I don't what goes into it? I mean, you talked about quarterback play and you talked about special teams. Yeah. I just wonder, when you have a sample size, when a coach is coached long enough, and it was interesting you brought up Alabama with this and the one-score losses, that Kalen DeBoer specifically came off of a season at Washington where he was bulletproof late. And so you would think that there was something in his brain that had figured out how to manage a team late, but obviously this is a completely different roster against completely different opponents with completely different flaws, different strengths, whatever. But I wonder if over time we can get something that gets us to a point where it's just this coach is more likely to put his team in a position to do everything they can to win more so than this other coach.
And I just pulled up, we can bag on Hugh Freeze from time to time, but I just pulled up his record in one-score games. It's 21-21.
Right.
So it's not like he has a history of being awful in these specific situations. At Auburn, he's 2-6.
Right.
And so, but in theory, there's nothing saying that Auburn can't be a massive turnaround team this year. It's just when your eyes see what they saw last year, it's burden of proof for Auburn here.
Yeah, I just have this feeling. I'm going to belabor this point because we've all, as college football fans, watched our team down 4 and seen the offense that trots out on the field. and known before it has begun that drive,
Yep.
you're like, there's just no chance.
Yep.
There's absolutely no chance they're making their way with 3.5 minutes and 2 timeouts, 78 yards down to the end zone and scoring. And it would comfort me to know that there's a number backing up that feeling that we've all felt.
Yeah, I mean, there was last year anyway. I mean, boy, yeah, I just can't. I keep wanting to immediately say no, but Auburn really does have a good, and no, they just have
right.
They have to prove it. They have to prove it, and they very well might.
Who else was in that Auburn camp of underperforming and you feel good about this year based on either the killer turnovers and change, if it's a coach, whether it's a quarterback, a coordinator, whatever, where you say to yourself, there's no way it can happen exactly like this once again. The numbers would be infuriated. So.
Well, UCF was second from the bottom, and having watched, every time I watched UCF, they had like a 5 or 10 minute span. You realize like this is one of the best teams in the country,
yes.
And then they didn't make a good play for another 2.5 quarters. So that makes a lot of sense. And funny enough, I mean, this is proof of regression to the mean and whatnot. But you talked about Kalen DeBoer's Washington the year before, going whatever they were, 8-0 in 1-score games, whatever that was.
Yeah,
ridiculous number of tight escapes. Well, not only did Alabama underachieve last year with DeBoer, DeBoer's former team Washington underachieved. They went 6-7 with a team that should have produced probably 8 wins on paper. With the way those games played out. And I always have to specify that too. I'm not talking about like they should have won because of talent or anything like that, but actually the stats of the game suggest that was an 8-win team that just happened to win 6 games instead. So maybe that means good things for them. Obviously they had 2 new coordinators and a bunch of new starters, so we'll see.
Right.
But they certainly, all the breaks that Washington got the year before, neither Washington nor DeBoer got those breaks last year. On the flip side, Arkansas State was hilariously, that was they played 13 games. The second order win total was 4.0. But they went 8-5. I don't know how. I watched some of those, the endings of some of those games. I'm pretty good at, having ESPN Plus at the ready for when a Sun Belt game gets 2 minutes left. It didn't make any sense that they won those games, and the stats certainly back that up. Now, Iowa State and Texas Tech were the next 2 teams on that list.
Mm-hmm.
Iowa State was another one that was on the wrong side of close games for a while, and that all flipped last year. Texas Tech's an interesting one because they still felt pretty disappointing, even while going 6-1 in 1-score games.
I was going to say the Iowa State Texas Tech game specifically. You watch that,
right.
And even knowing the result, you're like, there is no possible way Texas Tech can win this game. Let's move on, and yet, they do.
And so that is a really, really interesting scenario this year with Texas Tech signing an amazing transfer class, having lots of experience, having a lot going for them, and then remembering that even at 8-5, they weren't as good as an 8-5 team is supposed to be. That was a team that finished in the 40s or 50s in SP plus. So they have a lot of ground to make up because we don't know who's going to be good in the Big 12, but we know there are going to be a lot of top 15 to 30 teams. And there are going to be a ton of close games, and we'll see if Texas Tech can win those close games again and actually be better overall too. It'll be interesting.
So who are the teams last year? I know one of them was Oregon, just as per my own personal interests, who weren't especially lucky in terms of turnovers, but were successful, and their fans should feel good that they weren't reliant on weird, anomalous, is that a word? Anomalous numbers with turnovers, but yet still performed, and what we saw on the field was somewhat representative of what the universe had in store.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State was 14-2 and underachieved. They had 14.8 second order wins. That was safe. It's safe to assume that Ohio State might have been pretty good last year. Penn State was another one. They were 13-3. Their second order win total was 13.5.
Okay.
Basically that Notre Dame game flipped the other way. Therefore they ended up slightly under, which I still feel bad for Drew Aller, man. He walked out onto that field at that end. It was like, it's time for me to win this game. And threw the worst pass he threw all season.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's see who else we got here. Yeah. SMU, their 11 wins were like very close to what they should have been. Texas was really close. Indiana, even with the turnovers luck, they still, obviously they didn't play many great teams or many close games, but they backed up the stats.
They performed as if they should have
right
against the opponents they played. Yeah.
Right. So that was good. The ones that overachieved, I mentioned Iowa State. Missouri is 11-1 in one-score games over the last 2 years. I feel maybe I can will that to continue, but probably not. If Bo Prabula isn't anything other than an outstanding fourth quarter quarterback, that number is going to come down. They could be a really solid team this year, but just finally lose close games again and see their win total fall a little bit. Let's see. Michigan going 8-5. That was a 6-win team on paper.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's another one where, like Texas Tech, we think they're going to surge forward, but they're surging forward from a spot that's maybe a little lower than we expected. So that'll be an interesting one.
Right. So
watch.
I guess you look at games like the USC game, maybe the Minnesota game, the game against Alabama. Yeah.
That was, I don't remember. It was like 20%, 20%, I think, post-game.
Right. The offense didn't do much, but in terms of turnovers and field position with those turnovers, it was great fortune. And look, if you're not good, be lucky, and that's okay.
That's right.
The one area of this all that I was super interested in, and I don't know how, I'm sure this is the sort of shakiest ground you were on in terms of quantifying injury luck.
Yeah.
Injury luck, where you said, okay, I'm not sure exactly how to go about this, but what I did was, and I'm using your brain, even though I was not there, that you said, okay, I'm going to look at the number of starts that the starters who played as much as humanly possible made, and the spot starters, and see, how many games they're starting, and going with who played against teams that had the fewest consistent starters, something like that. Yeah. Explain your process for figuring out injury luck.
Yeah, we were calling it injuries luck because that's a great name. It's really lineup stability, if we were being honest. I started off by just basically going team by team and counting up like how many teams started 4 different guys at quarterback. That was like UCF and Utah, I believe, were the only 2. Maybe there was a third.
Right.
And I was going, how many started at least 10 different guys on offensive line, and I was kind of coming at it from that perspective. And then I realized I have starts data now, so I basically just pulled everybody who started the game and counted up the number of players each team had who started either all or all but one game on one side, and then the number of players that a team had that started either 1 or 2 games.
Right.
So that tells you pretty like how stable were the lineups in general. Obviously, I could have just used a plain old like average number of total starters or something like that, but I thought this was I just created a ratio from that, and it created interesting things. As I was playing with this, I found, we'll see like multiple years, we'll see what this kind of does, but the teams that had the best ratio of guys who started almost every game versus guys who started almost none, Penn State was at the top of the list. They had 16 guys who started all but 0 or 1 games. That was top 10. And they had only 4 guys who started only 1 or 2, which was tied for second best. So
right.
I just used a ratio. That was a 4.0 ratio, 4-1, and they led the way. Indiana was second, which does kind of even with obviously they had quarterback injury issues that we only sort of knew about.
Right.
And he kept playing.
Right. But, you're dealing with an injured starter, which is there's no number you can associate that. He's playing, but also I forget what exactly came out. It turned out he had a torn ACL, which we didn't know about, and also was dealing with some sort of, I think it was a thumb injury, a broken thumb, or a strained sort of thumb ligament or something. Yeah.
So, I mean, good for him.
Yeah.
Good for Rourke. He was amazing. But he kept playing, and that's all we're ever going to know. So they were up there. Rutgers was up there. Texas was up there too, which you think about it again, like obviously they had a quarterback injury issue. They just had a weird quarterback situation all the way around, but the rest of the lineup was remarkably stable for them. And that's not something you can necessarily count on from year to year. Now, some teams took great advantage of this. Oregon was tied for 7th with this ratio. Tennessee was up there as well. Sam Houston State was very high in this regard, which they were kind of lucky in all 3 of these categories, which good luck to you, Phil Longo. You're about to, you're inheriting a roster that got hit pretty hard by attrition and also was maybe the luckiest in the country last year. So have fun. But the funniest team on this list that by far was Purdue, who had some of the best lineup stability in the country while maybe playing like the worst power conference team of the last 10 years. That's a really can't blame injuries for how terrible they were.
Right.
Last year.
It's almost as if like you have grounds to fire your second year coach because
I was about to say I don't like firing second year guys.
Right.
I feel like Ryan Walters had not figured things out there. It was probably good to make that move.
So did you judge? Excuse me if I forget. Did you judge who had the luckiest schedules, the luckiest runs, or was that even more difficult because you just again? The starter could be hurt and playing. The starter could be You could change somewhere between the 6 games in, 5 games in, and so it's just like it's not dealing with lineup stability. If this right tackle isn't working out 5 or 6 games in, is there any way to judge who has the luckiest or unluckiest path based on opponent lineup stability?
We'll say that's for next year.
Yeah.
I got to save something for next year. I got to upgrade this in the future. No, that is a pretty interesting thought because you can always think of a team that did get played 3 straight games against backup quarterbacks,
exactly.
that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's a way to quantify that moving forward.
Well, what else do you have going on in your life that you can't just extrapolate every stat?
Not a single thing.
With opponent adjusted metrics.
Bored.
Yeah.
I am lazy.
Unbelievable. Okay. So in terms of luck moving forward, you've talked about some of the teams and you opened with Clemson, and I kind of want to talk about them briefly, that they had almost extraordinary turnover luck, but won games. Right? They weren't just winning games with lack of second.
Games.
Right.
Yeah.
They're winning close games. They hung on in the ACC championship game. They, by every single metric and by every single eyeball test, improved various facets of their game last season. What was it about Clemson this past year that has you intrigued about what they might be in 2025?
Yeah, the first comment I received that I got when this went up was, "Man, you are lower than anybody on Clemson this year."
Right.
And it's kind of funny. I'm not low on them. I'm just not buying top 5 potential yet. Part of that is because they had extreme turnovers luck. Just thinking back to the SMU game itself.
Yeah.
It starts with not only a big sack, I think on 3rd down, but then, it's a perfect sack and strip and the same guy recovers it and sets up the first touchdown. Just little things like that added up. They did that a lot last season, and that's really hard to replicate even if you're, little old Clemson. But they're fascinating to me. Number one, because of that, maybe they were a little bit fortunate last season. But then also we just got this tiny little glimpse of an actual Clemson offense that makes big plays. And that's what everybody who's talking about them as a top 5 team this year is remembering TJ Moore catching balls down the sideline against a really good Texas secondary. Wow. Brian Wesco, when he was healthy, he had a lot of really nice moments. Those are both freshmen who produced great numbers for freshmen, and they should get better. Antonio Williams is back. So you can see from a personnel standpoint, they're number 1 in returning production, but they were number 1 in turnovers luck. They're really good they're really efficient overall, but also that Texas game was the only time in the last 5 years that they've made big plays. It's been a very, very efficiency heavy and big play light offense. And that's not, you don't win national titles without big plays. So it's just really interesting. I think I'm going to have them probably 10, 11, 12, something like that in SP Plus to start the year. And I can absolutely justify that. But we're going to find out once and for all if Clemson in this era can put together a national title roster, because if this isn't it, I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah, we'll see. There's just a lot to really like, and then a lot of things that can really make you hesitate.
And Clemson is one of the few teams that returning production and roster stability actually gives you a better idea. You can criticize Dabo all you want for not taking advantage of the portal, but for somebody like you, who stability is sort of the name of the game as you try to project things out, it's pretty great that Clemson is bringing back a roster and not populating their roster with transfers in the way that other programs are.
Yeah, even my dogs get worked up about Dabo Swinney. And I mean, he didn't add many transfers here, but he added some good ones. The hype kid from Purdue did really well. So I love that he got a CMO receiver, an FCS receiver in Clemson style. He's not a big play guy, but he's a good possession guy. So I like a lot of what I see here. The experience levels are good. And like you said, I mean, I've had a problem for a few years now where what I call returning production is actually a combination of returning and incoming production.
Right.
It's counting transfers production from other schools. And that's not really the case with Clemson. Clemson's returning production is returning production, and that should make them really good. I just don't know if I believe that they're top 5 good.
Do you discount incoming production in some way because it's a new system, it's a new place, or do you just have to take it on its face?
So far, just plain using it as production works pretty well in the projections. I still have grand designs, hopefully by August, of like taking the last couple of years and splitting them out and seeing, like, should I be discounting? Right. Should I count this as more, this as less, or whatever? But the projections are still pretty good doing it this way, so I keep doing it. So any adjustment I make in that regard will probably help Clemson even more, but they're still going to probably end up in that kind of 8 to 12 neighborhood.
Has anything shifted at all in terms of the predictive nature of your big factors, whether it's turnovers, whether it's generating and stopping explosive plays? Have the numbers swung at all in a more chaotic sport, or have things sort of held relatively firm?
I think the preseason projections are still pretty accurate, but they're more volatile. Like the misses, when you miss a team, are going to be pretty big, and therefore it's going to take longer for it to get that team right over the course of the season. But once the ball's rolling in this season, the game itself doesn't seem to have changed all that much. It's, that success rate measure that I always talk about is still the most reliable thing, which is fun because it's also not how you win games. You win games with big plays and turnovers, except those are extremely unreliable under all circumstances, pretty much.
Right.
And so it makes it a fun game to analyze, I guess. But no, I mean, that's still the SP Plus formula during the season hasn't really changed that much. It's just how you handle the off season that it becomes a little trickier, even if I still do, I think, a pretty good job.
I want to transition quickly. You have a book that is, I believe, almost at print, almost at press.
Yeah.
What is the book? What is it about? Please, and we'll have you back on during its release, but talk about, he said as a professional journalist, talk about coming at you, Bill Connelly, ESPN, Como. What's the book and what's the inspiration?
It's called Forward Progress. Had to get a football term in there. It's basically, how do we get here? Where are we going with college football? I think they want to, it's like Forward Progress, the definitive guide to the future of college football.
Of course.
Because that sounds like a good title, I guess.
Sounds great to me.
But no, it's, I've been sitting with this thing for about a year and a half now. The due date is like a week and a half away. So by the way, note to solid verbal listener, Donald Trump, anything you're planning on doing with executive orders, like do it today. Or
with regard to NIL and Nick Saban.
Right.
Yeah.
Not either today or 6 months from now. That's been my biggest concern with this book for a very long time, has been it's going to be outdated the moment you read it, because 38 things are going to happen over the summer.
Right.
So seeing that headline on Friday did not make me incredibly happy, since already we're going to go to print without the House settlement being completely settled, thanks to foot dragging in that regard. But regardless, I really, that part aside, the player payment chapter aside, which is going to be outdated when you read it, I like the way it came about. I just basically separated things into 10 essays, more or less, one on the history of realignment, one on the history of arguing about a playoff, one on the history of arguing about paying players, all these things. And it was really kind of useful for me, because so many things were changing all at once that I didn't feel like I had a vision for where things should go anymore, because things were changing too much. Like one of the things I mentioned in the Why Doesn't Football Have a Commissioner chapter was that, back in our SB Nation days, I did a big running for commissioner thing. And I think 2017, and I had a platform, like these are the 9 things I would change about college football. And I realized after a while, I didn't really have that anymore. You're just reacting to everything that's changing as it goes. And so, being able to step back and chew on each one of these topics kind of individually, I think was a healthy exercise for me. Hopefully it's fun to read.
Is there, because everybody loves somebody to blame, right? It's a way to avoid accountability for yourself or for anybody that you like. In your research, I'm not saying who is the one person to blame for
Jim
whatever.
Delany.
Jim Delany? Really?
He checks a lot of boxes.
Okay, so
but go ahead.
Not blame.
Yeah.
But if you were to say who is most responsible as the architect for, I don't know what year you can point to as when things really, really changed. It was 2010, 2009, when you have Texas A&M and Mizzou eventually, and, all sorts of movement in the sport and the Longhorn Network. There's all sorts of things you can argue kick-started the modern era. Is there a single person who you can point to as the closest thing to an architect of what everybody arguing underneath your tweets or skeets or whatever, is there that person?
The
Jim
two
Delany,
that come to mind,
I guess.
the two that come to mind, I'm blanking on the guy's name, but the NCAA lawyer who refused to settle the NCAA versus Board of Regents of Oklahoma and Georgia in the 80s, the Supreme Court decision that ended up telling the NCAA you can't control the TV contract anymore. The guy, Andy Coates was the name of the lawyer who argued for Oklahoma and Georgia. He ended up being Oklahoma City mayor. He said at the time, and he said like last year to NBC News, like, I'm ruining college football by winning this case. He begged the NCAA to settle because he's like, I don't like a lot of the places this might go if we win. And there's nobody in charge of anything. But the NCAA doesn't settle. They've settled like twice ever. One of them was the House settlement recently. And that set the ball in motion to where super conferences became a thing, and everything that followed. That case, people have heard of that case. Probably it's pretty well known, but it really was as important as people say it is. And so that was really the moment where things got rolling in a certain direction. And the guy who started the 1990 round of realignment, the guy who started the gold rush and arms race with television networks, conference television networks, and the guy who started the 2010-11 round of realignment was Jim Delany, commissioner of the Big Ten, who those were humongous moves that the Big Ten made in all of those circumstances. And it's not to say nothing would have happened without those things, but they were the first ones to do it, for better or worse. And it changed college football considerably.
Do you consider, so I saw Andy Coates, he even gave him an interview and to say what you said, right? It's that he feels like he messed up college football and wanted to settle and wasn't able to with the NCAA with regard to TV contracts and the rights of schools to negotiate and conferences to negotiate. What does Jim Delany has just been so staunchly, Big Ten over college football, the health of college football. And you trace that back to 1998 was Penn State. Yes. Penn State joining the conference? Yeah.
Like December 89 is when they invited Penn State.
That he says, I specifically work for these, Big Ten presidents and chancellors, and then with the opportunity to expand with, I guess it was Nebraska in 2010, and then eventually Rutgers and Maryland before, USC and UCLA, but that's later on. He didn't look at part of his job as having to look at college football as a whole, because it's very difficult, as you just sort of said. There is no college football as a whole.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I don't know who I'm reporting to as Big Ten commissioner, because I'm the Big Ten commissioner and there's no college football commissioner. So I just have to, in perpetuity, look out for the people I work for. And that's the Big Ten, the people who run Big Ten schools.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I mean, Jim Delany, Greg Sankey, BB from the Big 12, they were all smaller conference commissioners first.
Right.
They got into these big, they know how the other half lives. They know how everybody lives, but their job is to report to their school presidents and make those school presidents happy. And those school presidents, I did enjoy, I talked to Matt Brown, our friend Matt Brown, former SB Nation, Extra Points now. And he had one of the better quotes about how like so many university presidents think they really know college sports and really want to be involved in college sports, front door of the university, all that stuff. And they screw up college sports constantly.
Right.
Part of it is by not really knowing what they're doing. And part of it is because they're pressuring their commissioners to get what's best for them at all times. And there's no position above Greg Sankey and the other commissioners who can basically say like, no, don't do that. The sport as a whole will be worse off if you do that. So don't, and you can't do that. There's nobody to do that. So everybody's just looking out for themselves. And therefore whoever's in charge of college football is whoever's in charge of the most powerful conference. So what
have there ever been attempts to legitimately figure out a person, an organization, the NCAA rules on, its governance is basically eligibility essentially, and has been for a long time now. And the competitive nature of games, 1 foot in, 2 foot in, whatever, 2 feet in. Has there been an attempt at all for commissioners saying we need some sort of guidance above us for the good of the sport, or they just have had no interest ever?
No, I think, the 80s were a giant what if in this regard, not only because of the Supreme Court case. Like, if the NCAA settles, you probably get, I think, a far expanded TV offering, but the NCAA is still sort of in control of it. Maybe there are further cases and everything happens the same anyway. But there was a chance because of that. And there was a chance because of the College Football Association that came about in the late 70s, basically as like a power conference, microphone, just as a way of them expressing their own preferences and whatnot. They negotiated a television contract in the early 80s as a secondary thing to the NCAA's contract. It was part of the reason why you ended up with a Supreme Court case in the first place. And once Board of Regents happened and everything was decentralized, they controlled all of the TV, a giant TV contract for everybody outside of the Big Ten and Pac-10. Big Ten and Pac-10 and Rose Bowl never played by the same rules, and therefore it was doomed from the start. But they tried. If the Big Ten and Pac-10 had come aboard, if in the late 80s when there were all these budget problems because of Board of Regents, and because suddenly there were all these TV contracts that weren't paying nearly as much money because everybody had a greater selection of games, there was a moment there where you could have potentially brought the Big Ten and Pac-10 into the fold, had a giant overriding contract where everybody gets money based on appearances and whatnot, and maybe things were kind of stable. But nobody thought that giant contract would pass antitrust tests, basically. Right. And there was uncertainty from the government in that regard. And then eventually some conferences just said, screw it. The SEC obviously expanded to 12 teams. Big Ten out of Penn State. Everybody started breaking off into what they thought were going to be. It sounded like they thought it was going to be like a one conference per network kind of deal, and therefore you need the biggest conference with the most brands and everything. Texas and A&M and Arkansas all almost joined the SEC for a minute there, and then didn't. But yeah, that was when so much of the shift of tectonic plates happened. And it feels like a few of those things really could have gone in a number of different directions, and we just got the direction we got.
Do you think it's too late? Are we too far gone to organize that the conferences could figure out a way to organize together? Are we too far gone where the sense of college football community is completely lost, based on the annual positioning and jockeying for squeezing every last drop of TV blood out of every rock? I
think it's hard to imagine us getting to, this is a weird thing to say, it's hard to imagine us getting to a better place in that regard without some sort of crisis. Right. And some sort of situation where Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti feel they actually need to look out for the good of Iowa State. I use Iowa State as an example in the book for whatever reason. I don't really know how that came about, but it ended up being a very good example of, Iowa State averaged 57,000 in home attendance last year. They've been right up there for a decade now. They have 2 top 15 finishes ever. They don't threaten the overall leadership in terms of, they're not threatening to win the titles that the Blue Bloods get to win, but they get to be part of the bigger, the power conference structure. And it feels like, the biggest thing we can do to hurt college football is to take those teams, the Iowa States and the Kansas States and the NC States and the teams that draw, even though they don't really have a reason to in terms of titles, and basically tell them, no, hey, you officially do not matter in this equation. And it does feel like every single time we try to drain more just blood from the rock or whatever the saying is, like it feels like we start inching towards not a super league in terms of anything real, but just kind of, this is the super league of, we're just going to slowly distance ourselves in the SEC and Big Ten from everybody else. And I don't see how that helps the sport. So it's not going to change unless Petitti and Sankey have a reason to look out for everybody else. I liked one of my favorite chapters is probably the least focused chapter in the book. It's about, soccer fans shot down a super league and how, fans have a certain amount of power and all the different ways this could go. And I got to roll with Jason Kirk, another former SBNer, if you catch a theme here.
Yeah.
And he's like, we need to convince Greg Sankey that he should become Dr. Doom was the main. Basically, I am the greatest being on this planet. It helps the planet if I take control of everything. And basically, the SEC expands to about 140 teams, and the Big Ten expands to about 140 teams.
Right.
And we have promotion and relegation and live happily ever after. I doubt that's probably the most realistic scenario.
Yeah. Soccer fans would also point out that promotion and relegation, or at least relegation, is absolutely catastrophic for those teams, for those towns, for those programs, for those stadiums. It's
great
really
for the
bad.
ones going up, and it's terrible for the ones going down.
Right.
And,
exactly.
So
You also have to talk about, you talk about Dr. Doom. My theory has always been that, like, you'll placate Tony Petitti or whoever's in charge of the Big Ten. They're like, you get to add a Pacific division to your conference, and you get to rule it, and maybe we'll call it the Pacific 8, we'll call it the Pacific 10, whatever you want to call it is fine. And we get this sort of like reconstruction of a conference that I think a lot of people love, as far as I can tell, but just in a different context, and maybe that's a way forward. But I guess it's a long-winded way of also asking, what type of person would have the uncompromised stomach to be that villainous, to be able to withstand, the arrows of, the powerful lobbies of the Big Ten and SEC, and make unpopular decisions because they feel it's, truly within the best interest of the capital S sport. And does that person, like, you could say, like, oh, Nick Saban, in all his,
right.
Sage wisdom over the years. And like Nick Saban's looking out for coaches to make the lives of coaches smoother and easier. And I think he has players in mind too. But he's not necessarily out for the good of the sport. He is a compromised person, as we all are. But like, what type of person is that, and do they exist?
Yeah, I mean, it would almost have to be a Saban-like figure that just comes to the table with all the. I made fun of the word gravitas in the book.
Right.
That was when we were talking, when the first college football playoff committee came about. It had Condoleezza Rice and Tom Osborne and Barry Alvarez, and they basically tried to create this committee of people that were unquestionable in there. And the very first year, everybody questioned them greatly. Yeah. So I don't think that person exists. And you're right. You have to be able to get away with changing a lot without losing political capital, without losing all the people. And you think about, like, even Greg Sankey, working out for the what's best for the sport. Well, that means he's not working out what's best for, like, the Mississippi State president,
right,
or the Kentucky president or whatever. And those are the people he answers to. And I don't know. Like, I think, we've talked before about maybe the college football playoff itself can become kind of this organization of sorts. Like, to play in the playoff, you have to opt in, which means you have a collective bargaining agreement with players, and you have this, and you share money, and you do this, and there's a list of things that you opt into doing because you want to play in the CFP or whatever.
Right.
Like, maybe then the person in charge of the CFP can. You're still going to piss a lot of people off. And that seems to be a very hard thing to get away with. So I try to step back at one point in the book and basically talk about, like, when we talk about the good of the sport, what does that actually mean? Like, what should we actually care the most about if we can't control the money and everything else? And I think basically, more than anything else, it's, basically teams playing the teams their fans want them to play. Yeah. For stakes that, number one, the players understand, everybody understands, and also that are achievable to some degree, where if you have the best team in the history of your school, you can beat a lot of teams, you can win a lot of games, and you can make it really far to, whether that's whatever that is, like, we have Sweet 16 banners sometimes for basketball teams. And like, the haves and have-nots can't be so far separated that they can never be touched. Even if, the haves still have more than the have-nots.
Right.
Like, it feels like this is not crazy to talk about UCLA needing to play teams in the West, that their fans can travel to the games, that they played 80, 100 times in their history. Mm-hmm. And that we can still have another Boise State at some point in our lives. It doesn't feel like that's too much to ask.
No, not at all. And it's, it brings me full circle. I have one name It's somebody who has been able to weather so many powerful voices in his career, is still very much in the center of the sport, is very vocal, is heard from, seen all the time. Gene Steratore. Gene Steratore running college football. You're telling me somebody who has been barked at by Rick Pitino, Nick Saban, take your pick, is there to just enforce rules, right? He didn't make the rules. He's there to enforce the rules that everybody agreed upon. It seems like he's got a pretty steady personality. I don't know him personally. I don't know what kind of skeletons he has. I don't know how compromised he has, but at least publicly, I think we could do worse than Gene Steratore.
Okay. That's
okay.
I've literally no other name to share with you in that regard, but besides my own.
Of course.
Obviously.
Yeah. You are coming at this from, I think, an admirable place that you just want good football. You want teams to be respected if they're good, and you want teams to, if they've earned a seat at the table, to be at the table.
Yeah, it's fine that Texas is always going to make more and spend more than everybody else.
Right.
Like, that's fine. They just don't need even more money than they already have.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's one of the things that drives me the craziest is now we hear a lot about, like, especially now that the ACC deals come about, is someday Ohio State's going to realize that, why are we making the same from this contract?
Leaving money on the table.
We're leaving money on the table, and Minnesota's lucky to be here. So we have leverage. And that's what we all watch college sports for is leverage.
Yes. TV branding. Yep.
They don't need more than they already have. Even if they spend a ridiculous amount, they don't need more than they already have.
Final question. You just made your first trip to Japan. I have not been to Japan. I'm dying to go to Japan, to Kyoto and Tokyo, Osaka, you name it. What were your big takeaways? What are your big recommendations for people traveling to Japan?
First of all, that 13.5-hour flight was even more brutal than I thought.
Yeah, it's long.
That was tough. And I was trying to get up every couple of hours, and my hamstrings were still sore for a couple of days afterwards. Sure. Like, that was a lot. Mm-hmm. So be prepared for it's going to be even worse than you think.
Yep.
Although flying back with the current, it was only 11.5, and suddenly that didn't seem bad at all.
Great. So that's the difference. So bring some kind of lacrosse ball for your hamstrings. Really get the leg swings in. Okay.
Yeah. Like, be the person who just stands in the aisle and does the stretches every few hours. Like, embarrass yourself. It's fine. You're just trying to survive here.
You're only as happy as your ligaments. Go on.
That's right. So it was one of those school trips. The kids in 7th grade, it was with EF Tours. So we didn't, every minute was planned, basically. Okay. So I knew that the result of this trip would be that I immediately wanted to go back with my own itinerary. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was. But basically the main takeaways are Tokyo is enormous and unknowable.
Yeah.
Like, you could go to Tokyo 10 times and see a completely different Tokyo. We did hit all the major tourist notes and ate some good hot pot and ramen and all that. But it's such an enormous freaking city. Like, it was hard to get to know. Osaka is the trendy. Osaka is the LA.
Okay.
Much further on the trendy side, pretty expensive overall. Lots of weird personality there. We were only in Osaka for like 4 hours, so I only got to know so much, but that was good. Kyoto's the one I absolutely want to go back to.
Ooh.
Kyoto was super cool. We were there for a few days. Obviously, it's ridiculously old. So like the temples and shrines there are particularly important and old and all that. Mm-hmm. And it's cool. It's got like 30 colleges in the in that city. The shopping district, the kid loved it. Her favorite thing, I think, from this trip, other than petting deer at one of the shrines outside Osaka, was that she has officially a favorite record store in Kyoto.
Oh, that's cool.
It was cool. She's a pretty cool 13-year-old now.
Yeah, she can forever now say like, oh, this record store in Columbia, in St. Louis, in Denver, it's cool. It's cool.
It's called Happy Jack too. It's called Happy Jack, which is even better, but it's no Happy Jack.
You should, if you like records, I got a spot in Kyoto. That's so right. She can tell her friends.
Next time you're in Kyoto. Yeah.
So, okay, great. I feel like you need a solid 2 weeks if you're going there for the first time to explore and just make even a little bit of sense. I can't wait to go. It's even pizza place. It's a pizza place. Tokyo style pizza is a thing.
The biggest mistake I made, however, and definitely don't do what I did and assume that all the super weird Kit Kats that you're seeing everywhere are going to be in the duty free.
Oh,
the duty frees are a little too fancy. So there was plenty of good stuff in the duty frees, but then we had to come home and immediately mail order all the weird Kit Kats, and we got them in before the tariffs.
Oh,
so that was
very
good.
nice. So that was your alt flavor priority. Alt flavor Kit Kats.
That was
okay.
We found a big. It had the purple sweet potato, had the sake flavored Kit Kats. There's some funky stuff, and I appreciate how weird they get with the Kit Kats.
Love to hear it. All right, Bill Connelly. Everybody, I don't know if Forward Progress is available for pre-order yet, but it should be.
It was on. I don't think so. It was on. There's like a placeholder on Amazon.
Okay.
But I'll definitely let everybody know when it's time to pre-order.
Please follow. Yes.
Covers. Love the cover. Cover
is great.
Hopefully between the covers is good.
It's Gene Steratore looking handsome as ever. No.
That's right.
Bill, thank you so much for your time. Check out his work on ESPN. Of course, once Forward Progress is available for pre-order, do check it out. And good luck with all of your future Kit Kat purchases.
Take care.